Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So, when we study the Quran, and especially if we have the audacity to sit down and attempt to translate the Quran, there are so many disciplines that we should know. Unfortunately, most people, when they embark on that kind of an effort, the first thing they say is, you should know Arabic. There's no question about it. You should know Arabic. But the Quran defines the requirements at the very outset. The Quran says, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِّلْمُتَّقِينَ الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is a book of hidayah for whom? People with taqwa. That's the first requirement for studying the Quran is consciousness of the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fear of Allah, love of Allah. That is the first requirement. Taqwa, the heart. You come to a well with an empty pot so that you can fill it with water. But if you approach it with your mind as if it's another book of dissertation or something like that, you miss it. That's the first requirement. And the second requirement is yu'minuna bil ghaib. That is faith in what is not manifest to you, what is hidden from you, what is beyond your perception. That's the second requirement. The third requirement is to establish salat, which is communion, to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. And then to split of what Allah gives us for other people, charity. These are the essential preliminaries before we study the Quran. Bring to the Quran an open heart so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may fill it with His rahmah. Then come the other requirements. Arabic language, yes, classical Arabic language. Classical Arabic language is very different from colloquial Arabic language. There are many scholars here from Iraq, Egypt. They know that the colloquial language is very different from classical language. So let's apply it to this question. The person who asked, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everything from water, so why not Iblis? I looked it up. I did some research. And here are the tools for research, and I would recommend them, especially for the young people. Here is a concordance of the Quran by Hannah Cassis. I would highly recommend it for anyone who is serious about doing research in the Quran. Most of the words in the Quran are explained in here with cross-references to practically every ayah. So now, let's use this tool that is available to us and ask ourselves, the word kulla, when you translate into English, another requirement for translation is not just knowledge of the Arabic language, classical Arabic language, but also a mastery of the English language, because the translation is dynamic, perceptual mapping from one language, one culture to another language and another culture. If you don't know English, then you'll translate it in such a way that an English-speaking person will say, what is the meaning of it? See, now look up the meaning of the word kulla and how our scholars through the ages have looked at it. It has many meanings. It could mean a matter, an affair, a thing, anything, something, everything, here and there, some, in some connotations, nothing, not, at all, in any way. In other words, the word kulla is not all-inclusive. doesn't include everything. It has multiple meanings. Then the other word is shay, thing. Now, it doesn't take a genius, it does not rocket science to say that the shaitan is not a thing. Shaitan is made of something different. All we know is that he is energy. If it was a thing, it would like form like us. If we take a scientific approach, since this is a conversation about science and the Qur'an, these days we don't talk about time space. That's passé, that's old language. We talk about matter and energy. M and E, that's what we talk about. So where does shaitan fill into the picture? Is he a shy? So you see, when we look up the meaning of shy in here also, you'll find that shaitan is not a thing. And the word kulla is not all-inclusive. So that people who ask that question, how come shaitan is not made of water, they have not studied the Quran. It's just another occasion for them to ask a question who somehow, in their opinion, allows them to say, well, ha ha ha, I found something in here that is not consistent with reason. Are you with me? Did you understand that? In other words, when you read the Quran, you must understand the many multiple meanings of it. It's like looking at a gem which has infinite number of dimensions, and some people look at it from different angles and get the light reflected. So this does not mean the shaitan was created out of water, unless you want to stretch the argument. You know, the other day I was talking to someone, I said, well, look at wax. A wax has to burn before it gives off light. Where does the wax come from? It comes from it oozes out from the belly of the bee. And where does that come from? It comes from a flower. And where does the flower come from? Flower comes from water. So if you want to take that kind of but that's not science. That's a roundabout argument. Classical Arabic requires us to slow down. This is what I have emphasized in my presentations to people. People say, well, today I'm going to read the entire Quran. Alhamdulillah, some people can do that. But for most of us, we must pause at every hurf. Every hurf is an ocean. And think about the multiple meanings of it to derive the maximum benefit out of it. And the maximum benefit comes from the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're with me? Quran. Okay, now and there were a few other questions too. There was another question from our good sister about the assumptions of science. Nice. Common knowledge, you know, we all have studied Newton's second law of motion, F equals ma. We all know that. Whether we build a bicycle, a truck, or a rocket ship, or a satellite, we use Newton's laws of motion. That's what governs our ordinary civilization. But we also know these days the Newton's laws of motion are only an approximation when the velocity of light velocity that we are moving at is small compared to the velocity of light. It breaks down. Either we go in the direction of quantum mechanics or in celestial mechanics. Assumptions. The assumption of before and after. I spent a great deal of time on time in the Quran. I have given you at least 21 definitions of time in the Quran. At least 21. If you're looking for clock time, it is there. If you're looking for relative time, it is there. If you're looking for absolute time, it is there. If you're looking for mysterious time, it is there. If you're looking for the passage of time, it is there. It is all there in the Quran. Why did I spend so much time on time? Because the study of science and of philosophy and logic and reason all depend upon our understanding of time. So people make assumptions and they study the Quran and then they end up in arguments. No, Allah's word is beyond argumentation. Allah's word comes from the heavens. in Arabic. The Quran is in Arabic. Translation is a translation. So we must know our own limitations. We must know under what paradigm we are discussing the Quran. And the same thing when we engage in a conversation with people today. The purpose of the series was very simple. The purpose was to point out that these days it's fashionable to say that there is a conflict between science and faith. Everyone says that. Oh, there is a conflict because of the theory of evolution or whatever. There's a conflict. People say that. I have tried to demonstrate that when people say that, we must know what faith are we talking about. Are we talking about the Christian faith, the Jewish faith, the Hindu faith, the Islamic faith? What faith are we talking about? In that paradigm, if you are a student of history, another thing that you must know if you are studying the Quran, in addition to language, is science and history. It's not my opinion, it's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. I quoted the last time. سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الْحَقِّ. Afaq, in the horizon, science and history, and within their own souls. So you must know the science of the soul. You must know history. You must know science, the best science with its assumptions. You must know both languages. You must know the context, the culture, always with the knowledge that we don't know. And then all of it within the paradigm of taqwa. So I spent a great deal of time on time. It's very important, if nothing else. Please remember that in Islam, there is no conflict between science and faith because, according to the Quran, nature is not God as it is in certain faiths. Many Eastern religions consider nature to be God. They worship trees, they worship the sun, even today. They worship whatever they find. No. And in the stories of Abraham, you know, Ibrahim alayhi salam. He looked at the star, you know the stories. And he said, no, that's not God. On the other hand, Islam also points out what is not non-God, not God, namely the secular approach. In the secular approach, they have taken God out of nature. This is secular. And hence, you know, they ascribe to nature capabilities which nature, you wonder where it gets it from. There's a Mother Nature. Mother Nature is going to do that. Good. We all love Mother Nature. Because they took God out of the picture in the 13th century. And I've given you some background, historical background, especially for the young. Why is it that the Christians maintain that there is conflict between faith and science, which we somehow parrot back? We say, well, there's a conflict. Because when the Christians started to translate works from Arabic into Latin after the conquest of Spain, starting with the year 1086, which is the fall of the capital of Spain, till the year 1248, when Seville finally fell. During that period, when they translated it, all the works from classical Arabic literature fell into their hands. And just as the Islamic scholars, the Muslims, had to face their faith in rational terms in the 8th century, the Mu'tazilites, you know, we have gone over that. The convulsions that it created and the outcome of it. The Christians similarly were faced with the same questions. They could not justify the assumptions of Trinity and the assumption of the Holy Ghost. And therefore, St. Thomas Aquinas, perhaps the most influential of the Latin classical writers who wrote in the 13th century, he postulated that there are issues that can be deciphered using reason, which is nature. And there are issues that cannot be deciphered using reason, which is faith. That was the origin of it, the beginning of it, the bifurcation. We don't have it. In the Qur'an, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not only asks us to think, to reflect, but in actuality presents evidence. In the Qur'an, nature has signs. It is a sign, S-I-G-N. Every created thing has a sign in it. Every atom has a sign. Every string has a sign. Every genome has a sign. Every person has a sign. We'll talk a little bit more about the signs that we see in nature. So the Quranic approach is that nature is good. It has been created, number one, to reinforce faith. La ilaha illallah, the central theme of the Quran, which is Tawheed, La ilaha illallah, points to La ilaha illallah. Every atom points to it. Every young person must become a great scientist. Study nature. Ask yourself, how does it happen? What is the sign in here? Let's get a Nobel Prize here, or 2, or 10. And I'll point out next week what happened to the Muslims. They stopped asking. So it is a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Similarly, history, what we do as human beings, how we build civilizations, how we destroy ourselves, is also a sign. Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala offer the example of Bani Israel again and again? Not to put them down. That's the wrong way. The problem with Muslims has been that the Quran, first of all, people stopped studying. They started listening to mullahs. They stopped studying. They don't study the Quran. They listen to mullahs. And these mullahs do not have, some of them are great, they're alims, but many of them do not have all of these capabilities. In addition to taqwa and belief in ilm al-ghaib and the prayer and charity, command of not just the classical Arabic language, but command of the English language or whatever language, it was Farsi or Pashto or Urdu or Malay, doesn't matter. And then on top of it, a knowledge of science and a knowledge of history. So an interpretation of the history of Bani Israel is not that Allah condemns them, which that's a different issue. They become our teachers. That history teaches us something about what to do and what not to do. We learn, that's a sign. What is the sign in history? What can we learn from it? That's the important lesson. That's the way to study the Quran. Every ayah in the Quran is a sign. By definition, it is a sign. I don't have to translate that. We know that. Ayah means a sign. So you read an ayah, it's an arrow. It arrow to La ilaha illallah. So you see, when people say there's conflict between science and religion, not in my faith. I don't have that conflict. To me, science is good. To me, science offers the signs through which I can reinforce my faith in La ilaha illallah, through which I can learn. So it would behoove Muslims to study nature, to become great scientists, to ask, to study history, become great historians, ask to become great sociologists, ask to build great societies and civilizations, ask. Allah teaches us what to do and what not to do, guidance from the Quran. The Quran is not a book of science. Don't try to prove something or disprove something using the Quran. No. The Quran is a book of hidayah. It's a book of guidance. هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. It is a book of guidance. Guidance of what? Guidance towards La ilaha illallah. Simple. The Quran is a simple book, but at the same time, it's very complex. So I want you, the young people, to go back at least with that clear understanding of the place of science in Islam, how important it is. Because I quoted from the Quran the last time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala invokes aql, which is reason, fikr, which is ponderance, the ability to think and process, the ability to see, which is the basis of science, and for what purpose? To know the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Very important. Now, let's go on and ask ourselves, in the midst of all this confusion, see, I can make it as easy, these lectures, as possible, but I want you to think about things ordinarily that are not presented. So the question before us is, if science is so obvious, is there, why did the Muslims fall behind? I will cover that next week. But how does science fit into the scheme of things? And for that, I want you to walk with me one step beyond what usually we do. Namely, look at not just knowledge, but the knowledge of knowledge. What is knowledge? Where does it come from? And in summary, knowledge can be classified into 3 different classes, summarily. The first one is ilm al-laduni. That's from the Quran. Nothing of what I'm saying is from me. If it is in the Quran, accept it. If it's not in the Quran, it's doctor's opinion. That's different. Ilm al-laduni, that which is revealed through the prophets. Jibreel alayhi salam comes to the Prophet and he says, Iqra. The Prophet says, I cannot read. And I have heard so many different lectures. Read, that means the Prophet was unlettered. True. Alhamdulillah, that's one interpretation. But you see, humankind cannot read by itself. Immediately after the Iqra, Be'ismi Rabbikal Ladhi, in the name of Allah. So whatever we know is through the name of Allah. Ilm al-laduni, that has come down to us through the prophets. That's the Quran. That's the Kitab, of which the Quran is the final completion of it. So the names of Allah, the 99 names, and some people say there's thousands of them, whatever. At least the 99, we all agree about them. Those names contain within them the genesis, the roots of all knowledge. Allahu, Khaliqul, Bari'ul, Musawwiru, Lahul, Asma'ul Husna, for instance. Khaliq. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We all recite all the time. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Alameen, universes. Not just the world. Universes. We can talk about how many universes we are talking about. So, that is ilmul laduni. Then it has 2 major branches. I'm packaging it especially for our young people. Inshallah, some of you will become great scholars one day. Inshallah. It has 2 major branches. One is ilmul ibara and other one is ilmul ishara. Ibara, ain, be, alif, re, a. Ibara, like ibarat in Urdu and Farsi. That which can be written. It comes from the connotation in the Arabic language of wading. If you have a stream, you have to cross the stream, Anyone who has lived in the area of monsoons or where the rains are plentiful know the following. You don't cross a stream without being prepared to get drowned at the same time. Because if the rain comes, not there, but somewhere upstream, the water does not rise slowly. It comes in a wave. It comes in a wave. The nature of water. Wave theory. But that's a different thing. So when you wade a stream, when you walk from one end of the stream, one edge of the stream to the other, is called ibara, to go. Anything that can be described, anything that can be taught, anything that can be written, anything that can be told through something that we comprehend. And therein are reason, senses, the comprehension that we have, and hence all of the disciplines that we learn in colleges. We go to Stanford and MIT and Caltech and Berkeley, and we learn physics and chemistry, even mathematics and biology and English. All of these fall into the category of ilmul ibara. It's a vast field, knowledge, tree of knowledge. On the other side is ilmul ishara, the knowledge of the heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created humankind. Is the hadith, you know this hadith. The hadith says, this hadith is Qudsi. Allah says, I created the universe for you. And I created you for myself. The meaning of that is that, as again another hadith says, the heavens and the mountains and the earth were not large enough to contain me. That's the Quran, isn't it? But the heart at the moment was large enough to contain me. So the heart, it has preponderance over the mind. The mind is perhaps the greatest creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all universe except the heart. The mind is marvelous. That little small cerebellum that we have, the neurons that we have, it is a marvelous creation. Reason, logic, philosophy, learning, all of them are here in the brain except the heart. Why the heart? Because it is the repository of ilmul ishara. That it cannot be described. How do you describe love? I'll tell you a story. Again, stories communicate things that good lectures cannot. You know the story of Layla Majnun, right? Yes or no? If not, I'll tell you the story too. No? Yes? You don't? Oh my goodness. See, Layla Majnun is a famous story. There are other similar stories in different languages, Hir Ranjha, etc., etc. In other words, a lover and the beloved. Layla is in love. Yes. Majnun is in love with Layla. He's in love. So it's a classical love story. And the teaching method is didactic, is called. These stories are there for teaching. Don't come back and say, where is it written? Only people who have whatever. So he dies one day in this story. Majnun dies. And he is buried, and the munkar, they come in, the two angels, and they start interrogating him. And they say, what is your name? They ask him Majnun. And he says, Layla. Says, what were you doing on earth? Layla. What do you believe in? Layla. No matter what question they ask him, he says, Layla. So the angels, now they got, my goodness, we have a problem here. We got to report it. So they go to the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're standing down below and say, Ya Allah, we have this man in here. And no matter what we ask him, he says, Layla. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's very pleased because he knows what's going on. And he commands the angels to go back and say, tell Majnun that Layla was really me. So the angels go back and they report to Majnun, Layla, you say, it's me. You are in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Majnun says to the angels, well, if Allah was really Layla, why did he have to invent or make Layla for me? What I'm trying to communicate is, how do you communicate love? It is ilmul ishara. That the condition of the heart cannot be communicated. There are things that you can communicate with a movement of the eye that you cannot write down in 1,000 books. Ilmul ishara. People who have inner knowledge communicate that without saying a word. The Prophet ﷺ communicated so much of what he was teaching to the Sahaba, sometimes without uttering a word. I'll give you another example. When Umar radiallahu anhu was assassinated, Hazrat Usman radiallahu anhu, he was elected the Khalifa. So we have gone over that in our history lectures. And it is said that those days, as we all know, the Khalifa used to lead the prayers. He was not hiding as do the presidents of these days in their armored cars and so on. They used to lead prayers. So he goes to the masjid and he ascends the mihrab. He stands there. And he is so overcome with emotions, they say he stands up, he looked, he wept, and they wept. And he sits down. Then the second time he stands up, he looks, and he weeps, and they weep, and he sits down. Third time, he stands up, he looks, he weeps, and he sits down. This is immediately after they have buried Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu. In that moment, what was transmitted? You cannot write a big book describing what was transmitted to those tears. Why do we cry? We read Rumi, why do we cry? There are people in here who are friends, and I'm not mentioning their names. They cry. Why do we cry? And can you write that down on a piece of, if you ask a chemist, he will come in and take a sample of the tears and you take it to the lab. So it consists of this kind of acid. There are chemists in here. I'm not a chemist. Or it contains this acid, this acid, this acid, this acid. Where in the acid is what is going on through your heart? Mulishara. So you see, that is the tree of knowledge that is consistent with the Qur'an. All of it is in the Qur'an. When we study the Qur'an, we should approach it with an open heart so that we take in the vibrations of ilmul ishara as well as ilmul ibara, keeping in mind that all of it comes from ilmul laduni. Then we ascend the tree of knowledge. Are you with me? Yes. Good. Very good. Alhamdulillah. So you see, when we then go on and study the Quran with the lens of, let's say, science, and ask ourselves, well, let me now do some research. As I shared with you in the khutbah, there are many different ways of studying the Quran. All of them, alhamdulillah, are good. If you want to study it thematically as a scientist, and if you want it, I will give you a translation of the Quran, as I did it, in word format, so you can do all the search you want. I want you to learn. And let's ask ourselves, what does the Quran teach us about human creation? And this is probably a good time to make a few comments about the theory of evolution. Now, here are the good things about the theory of evolution. The good things about the theory of evolution are that it appears to be a logical one. It is supported by some facts. it appears to be consistent. It appears to give answers to so many questions that people have. However, it does not answer the critical questions. What are the critical questions? Not just the theory of evolution, but ilmul ibara in general, what we call positivistic knowledge, what we call scientific knowledge, cannot and does not answer the question of the beginning and the end. Allahu awwal wal akhir. Allah is the beginning and the end. No matter which logic you take, it ultimately leads you to an impasse. Where does it come from? And let me elaborate. We have blown to pieces the assumptions of time. We have looked at 21, at least, definitions of time. We take the position that something happens after something else. We know now from quantum mechanics and our study of time that we live in a space-time trough. And the space-time trough is not valid as we approach what we call a singularity. We know black holes, for instance. These are just names. You approach a black hole, light itself gets sunk into it, does not come out. Time does not mean anything. It does not mean anything anyway. In the Qur'an, there are so many different ayahs. So if we don't know what time is, if we make assumptions about time, any position that we take based upon our assumption of time is also an assumption. Let's take, for instance, the evolution of man. If we come back and someone tells me, I believe in creative design, I say, Alhamdulillah, makes sense. Creative design. Theory of evolution, giving to nature the ability for these kind of spontaneous or the lateral transmission of genomes is something that is still debatable. The proofs are not conclusive. And until the proofs are conclusive, it is not science, it is a theory. It's a good theory, but it's still a theory. For instance, this is for some people who ask the question, good friends of ours, scholars. The difference between two brothers or two sisters from the same father, same mother, are at the minimum 3 million genomes. These are facts that we can look up and we can discuss it over a cup of tea. The difference between any of us here, brothers and sisters that we are, young, old, and so on, any of us, we are human beings, there's no question about that. At least 30 million genomes. And then the difference between us and the chimpanzees, so many more million genomes. Now, if I make the assumption that the Earth has been around for 3.5 billion years, and the Sun has been around for 4.5 billion years, for so many genomes to be common or being uncommon, you can calculate every 10th year or so, there should be a lateral transfer of genome. Just sort of using some scientific descriptions in here. You see, the world is a composite of billions upon billions upon billions, trillions upon trillions of events at any given moment. Within our own body, each of us contains trillions of cells. Each of us. The universe, trillions of events are happening at the same time. On a statistical basis, if you take a deck of cards, if you play cards, after a while, the deck of cards can repeat itself. It's a common phenomenon. It's only I don't know how many cards you deal with. Some people use 60. In these trillions of events happening at the same time, why is it a priori, obvious, that this will lead to the arrow of time? Why should things lead from the simple to the complex? Why is it that we have the appearance of a male and a female at the same time? Why can't we have the appearance of different molecules at the same time? Because we know that the earth was created, the whole universe was together at one time, then we had the gaseous substances, then they condensed, we know that much, the sun and the earth. And out of it, why can't we have different molecules, different types of appearances all at the same time? This is not science, what I'm saying now. I'm raising a question. It's a good theory. It still needs a lot of work before it becomes science. All I'm trying to communicate is that it's a good place to start when we talk about science is I don't know. I'm the first one to say that. I don't know. It's a good place to start. You ask me about science, first thing to say is, Allah help me, I don't know. Don't know. And then with some humility, what little we know, like, a child picking up a grain from somewhere, you can give some kind of an answer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the process in bold strokes about the creation of human beings. First, the creation of Adam. And in the khutbah, I covered the essential attributes of Adam. First, he is a trustee. Second, he has knowledge. Third, he has the ability to make a decision, choice. Fourth, he goofs it up, he makes errors. Fifth, he turns towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and is forgiven. And sixth, he is always in the company of shaitan. These are attributes. Any theory that bypasses these fundamental questions about who we are bypasses the fundamental questions. We must first define what constitutes human beings, what makes us human. That's what prompted me 40 years ago to write this book. What makes us human? We must first define it, then go looking for it. So my submission with my limited knowledge, with my ignorance, is that it's a good theory. However, it is not science. And we also then have to distinguish between nature and human beings. There are big differences. In any case, just my submission for your consideration. Anything in the Quran about the creation of human beings, all the way from conception in our mother's wombs, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless our mothers. May Allah bless our mothers. May Allah bless our mothers. From the moment of conception until the moment of death, it gives us a process. Is that consistent with what we know of science? Yes, it is. There is nothing in the Quran that science does not say it is consistent with. And I brought that book the last time, Maurice Bukai. He has examined the issue. So when you read the Quran from science, summary of today's presentation, in addition to what we have learned so far, is the following. Number one, when somebody says there's a conflict between science and religion, it is in his faith. For me, there isn't. Why? Because Allah tells me that nature and history are signs. For what purpose? So I say La ilaha illallah and discharge my responsibility. مَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. That's my responsibility, to serve Allah, to worship Him. Secondly, I repeat, I've blown to pieces theories based upon a fixed concept of time. People who don't know what time is take positions, hard positions, and they fight over it. Not true. Third, knowledge is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It cannot be taken away. It cannot be stolen. It cannot be passed on from father to son like we pass on a piece of paper, our stocks, our money. No, it's a gift from Allah. He gives it to whom He pleases. And Allah gives us a description of the knowledge of knowledges. Ilmul laduni, ilmul ibara, and ilmul ishara. All of them are important. Physics is important. Chemistry is important. Biology is important. Mathematics is important. Be great scientists. Ask and learn. Ask and learn. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you have to go to China in search of knowledge, which can also be translated to mean if you have to go to China in search of science, go to China. I use the word science because what did China have to offer at the time of the Prophet? They were disbelievers, but they had technology. They had the technology for printing, paper making, which was also made in Egypt, the papyrus, but the Chinese also had it. Making tea, they had an idea of hygiene. Their technologies. To learn, go there. There is no such thing as Christian science, Jewish science, Hindu science, Sikh science, Muslim science. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not distinguish between one or the other as far as nature is concerned. It is open to everybody, open book. So study it. Be great scientists within the paradigm of the Quran. It's all in here. Conclusion. Quran. Study it. Make it your own. Let it be your guide, inshallah. I'll take a few questions today, inshallah. Or learn from you, more importantly. This is for you.
I'll pick it up.
Okay, sure. Comments? Brother Al-Jaburi, you asked the last question, so today I'll listen to you. Did I answer the question?
Yes, except the fact that the shape could mean animate and inanimate.
That's right.
So the definition concerning the shaitan, we don't know the nature of shaitan. It is just an idea, and it is among ilm al-ghayb, it's something that we presume something about. So from that point of view, you are right. The word kulla will, take care of that. So maybe there is the answer to it.
Alhamdulillah. Sir, so happy to have you back here. When did you come back and how are things? Any comments? You come back with a lot of wisdom because you're traveling a lot.
I had something, I was reading something else, and something that's been troubling me is this whole concept of the soul.
Concept of the soul.
Of the soul, and is believed by every religion, everywhere, that it is immortal, it goes on, etc., etc., etc. So what is the science? What is science's view on this?
Well, first of all, I have covered it in some of my khutbahs. We must use Quranic terminology. The closest term in the Quran to soul would be nafs. But a nafs is a broad term. It could mean a person, an individual, or it could mean the self. In the sense that you're asking the question, it means the self. The nafs is not a single term. It's a composite term. It's like saying a house. A house consists of the entrance, the common area where we receive people. There's the kitchen, and there are the bedrooms, the private areas, and there's the nafs is that way. A nafs consists of the following. It does include, when we say nafs, it does include the body, about which there is a great mystery. The body is the body is a highly mysterious thing. We'll talk about scientifically. It includes the mind. It includes the heart, of which there are multiple layers in the Quran. all the way from sadr to the qalb to the, well, I'm forgetting the terminology, but there are multiple layers of it.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
صلاة القائم.
Very briefly, in 30 seconds, the other two terms that I was searching for are fuwad and bir. These are the four levels of the qalb, or the heart. And then we have the ruh. Each of them is a al-ism, which in Arabic has three connotations. It's a name, an adjective, and an adverb. About the ruh, we cannot talk much. We don't know much. It's the spirit. But about the nafs, there's plenty of literature in the Quran. Inshallah, we'll discuss it. The Islamic literature is very rich in the description of the inner attributes of human beings. The nafs, it embraces ilmul ibara, ilmul ishara, and ilmul laduni. Very complex term. Good question. It requires multiple lectures. Some of them I have shared with you, but I'll be glad to come back and discuss them again. The prayer time, inshallah. For the next week, which is probably the last lecture, isn't it? We can continue, but at least we'll have one more. I will go over why it was that the scientific revolution did not take place in the world of Islam. Why did it not take place? We'll talk about Al-Ghazali, we'll talk about Ibn Rushd, we'll talk about the Mutazilites, we'll talk about Aurangzeb. There are multiple reasons. And inshallah, that'll be good for young people because that haunts other people. Inshallah, we'll do it. Thank you so much.